learning curve, and it's our first stream from the new channel. So yes, there are some hiccups, uh, including not being able to see ourselves right now. Mm, now we should be able to. Okay, and fix my screen. Yeah, it's growing pains. New new setups are always gonna be tricky, I suppose. Um,
Change never goes smoothly the first go around. It just doesn't.
mm-hmm.
You always need that learning time. You just do. I wish we didn't. There are some people who seem not to need very much Gauguin.
uh
God.
I'm gonna not beat myself up, and I'm not gonna compare myself to those to the great ones who've never made a mistake. I'll admit that we are human,
No, it's
and
just that like Gauguin just, managed to be an artiste in so many mediums, as they say.
mm-hmm.
He was a sculptor, he was a painter. He what's the other thing that he did? Oh, he did wood carving because he was a sailor. He actually had a fascinating life, but
Mm-hmm.
he's been quite maligned and villainized. Anyway,
Um, episode 13. This is the redo because we just did an awesome hour-long episode, and it didn't get recorded anywhere. It just got broadcasted live out into the ether, and it dissipated ethereally
and it got
into
eaten. It got eaten by the ether.
the
The
void.
ether was hungry, and
Yeah.
it ate our podcast.
But
What happened to your podcast? The
yeah,
ether ate it.
we said important topical things that need to be said and heard. So we're going to just recap those important points that we made, like who we are, where we're coming from, what we're talking about, and why we're doing this show. We believe in Article 5. Oh, we're going to still read it again. I think that since this is now the episode, we'll read it again.
That's gonna stand. Well, read it again. You want me to read it?
Yes, I will try
Okay.
again to pull it up on screen, even though it didn't work last time.
Okay. So this is I'm pagan communist, and that is Rubber Fingers
Hi.
speaking on the other end. So here we go. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application, I got to say this like 4 or 5 times because nobody knows this one, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case, okay, so clearly, in either case, as we've said before, with Congress or a convention for an amendment, has to be ratified by the legislatures of
Mm-hmm.
3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. So there are two ways to ratify. And as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by Congress, so Congress once again gets to decide, has the final say in the ratification, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner after the first, I'm sorry, effect. The first and fourth clauses in the ninth section of the first article, and that no state without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. There you
Yes.
go. Our lovely run-on sentence. But
Yes. Uh, it's easier to follow along if you can see the words up on screen, but again, that's another tech issue that will have to be dealt with later.
we're working on. If we were real professionals at this, it would go much better because we'd have a lot more money.
Well, yep.
That's the difference, you know what they say.
We
From
do
an
with
amateur and a
without. We
professional.
do with as little as we can get away with for now.
That's right. We do with what we have. You know, we make the best with what we have. So,
Uh, but we have things to say, and we're trying to recall what was said last time. We talked about who we are. I'm Rubber Fingers. I'm an activist. I'm an artist. I'm a musician. I am a digital media uh, creator. And I've protested a bunch in the past and felt that it's uh, it's important to protest, but it lacks the edge. It lacks the teeth to get real change, and that's what Article 5 has, is teeth. And when you've been to a state house and spoken in front of legislators about a uh, piece of legislation that has actual power, if it's passed, you feel that empowerment, and then you can't go back to just protesting. You know that there's more that can be done, and so that's what this show is about. It's about empowering people with knowledge of how to make change. And joining me is
about
Pagan
the
Communist.
mysterious part. Okay.
Yes.
The one I'm the one who always says that it's the mysterious part of the Article 5. The
Mm-hmm.
part about the application of the legislators of the two-thirds of several states shall call a convention
Mm-hmm.
for proposing amendments. I mean that's rarely talked about. It's rarely even written about by scholars. Only recently has it started to catch some uh,
Traction.
attention.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that and I mean, I think it's always had, in some cases, maybe some traction, but um, I think it's more that it became a situation where it could have been popular, where something like a peopleized movement of the amendment may
Mm-hmm.
of an amendment may have been done, and by a populist movement. Although
And
I'm
there
not
are.
really sure that that's how the Article 5 meant. But that's on another note. On
Mm-hmm.
That's another note in another discussion that we didn't discuss this time. So we'll
There
or
are
for this time. And so
there are the other groups out there that we will be rubbing up against with this show, and we want to exist as a platform to discuss Article 5, but it's just our thoughts about it. It's just our personal positions. We're not speaking for any groups, just speaking for ourselves and
we're
keeping
mostly
it
here
real, basically. Yeah.
to empower and to do what we can to try to help fix the broken system of our
Yes.
government. But I
And
don't know and this didn't just happen. It didn't just happen with Trump, and it didn't just happen in the 1900s.
mhm,
I think this has been going on since the very cons- Constitution was written.
uh-huh.
To me, I mean, these arguments in some ways that we are having today were being done when they were debating even the Constitution itself. And that's part of why they debate the Article 5 so much and the
Mhm.
mysterious part of it, because the only supposed, because I'm not even sure that it says it was a constitutional convention, but I'm not sure it was actually called that at the time when the Continental Congress got together.
Mhm.
It was not to make a constitution, but they did. And then they changed how many states had to ratify it.
Mhm.
because at one time it had to be all of them, and then they changed it to just three-fourths. Well, in a way, back then, think about it. If you were a state like New York,
Mm-hmm.
that was going to be one who probably wouldn't ratify the Constitution, or you know, because they felt that they were big enough and economically strong
Mm.
enough to not have to have a constitution that was more federalist, which means a
Right.
stronger federal government. So that that does make a lot of difference on how they were writing it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, and how that it's being looked at today, because now we have the Constitution. The Continental Congress lasted for like what, like 3 years or something? I mean, 4 years. It, the Constitution has been around for 200 and over 230 years.
Mm-hmm.
200. We're almost at 250.
Right.
So it's not something that would be so easily thrown out, because people are used to it, and that change would be extremely difficult.
Exactly.
But if we could get a group of people together that could write something better than the Constitution, we still got it and said, okay, only 50% of the states have to ratify it. We'd still be in quite a quandary, because what if 50 of them said they weren't going to? Then
Mm-hmm.
they would just leave,
Right.
because it's a new government like the old one.
Mm-hmm.
The 13 states, the four that didn't ratify the Constitution, didn't have to come in
Mm-hmm.
to the United States of America. So why did they?
Mm-hmm.
What's the reason that they did that if they didn't like the Constitution?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying whatever argument they're using about the ratification process, I think in the long run holds no water. It will never, it will
They are
never be able to stand.
the
Go
definition of
ahead.
conspiracy theories, and those are, yeah, that's what we're going to address on this show. We're going to address the conspiracy theories. We're going to address uh, the difficulties, the high thresholds, which make it a difficult task to amend the Constitution, but a worthwhile one. We're going to address the other calls for amendments, groups like Move to Amend that I support, even though I somewhat disagree with the language of their resolutions. I do definitely admire them for their efforts, and Pramila Jayapal for introducing their amendment. Um, Groups like the Convention of States, we support their efforts to call a convention, and they're very close to calling one. But I don't like any of their amendments. Uh, I definitely don't like
Any of their
term
proposed
limits.
amendments.
I like term limits for judges and the Supreme Court, but not term limits for Congress or Senate or or Congress. But and we could talk more about that. Why? I mean, actually, that's kind of a quiz for anybody who thinks if you can't come up with an actual argument against the the subject matter and not just the process, if your only argument is against the process, it means you haven't really done your homework to come up with a good argument against the substance, which is for the Convention of States term limits, balanced budget, whatever other stuff they're calling for. I have actual arguments against
Well, their
those
problem is
amendments.
with their language.
Hmm.
The problem with some of the language of which they've called for a convention is a bit murky,
Yeah,
because it
it's
does,
broad. It's very
and
broad.
that is
Whatever. But
very
so if
broad.
if they write a broad, if they come up with an amendment
Well, it
that's
has to do
totally
with
different,
fiscal.
that's kind of their own fault.
Right.
If it doesn't mirror exactly the language of the resolutions calling for the convention, that's their fault for not making it more specific. But whatever, I guess they're fine with that.
Well, and the other argument is that they think that that the convention could become a runaway convention. That's what they call it.
Hmm.
Is that they believe that the Supreme Court would have no standing, would not be able to weigh in on it. And I, of course, find that hysterically funny.
Hmm.
Like, really? the
or that
Supreme
no,
Court
yeah,
not weighing in
that no one
on
would
whether
bring
you think
lawsuits. There'd be no suits brought against, the
there'd be
legit.
no challenge
There'd be no
to that,
challenges.
right?
Of course there would be. So,
Right, and that somehow, though, that the Supreme Court, that there'd be no right to challenge it, and that the Supreme Court would have no power over it.
mhm,
Now, where does that come in? That's not even that's like what? I mean, the Supreme Court uses the Federalist Papers for standing even today, and
mhm,
those were written for one purpose and one purpose only, to get the Constitution ratified by making a stronger federal government.
mhm. You could call them propaganda, and
Propaganda? Is that what
yeah,
you?
propaganda, and yet the Supreme Court uses them as like citation for
Oh
their
yeah,
rulings.
like they're written in blood
Hmm.
from from the goddess's mouth to, of course, that's me saying that, but from whatever supreme being to their ear.
Hmm.
Yeah. And just so you know, the three guys, only one of them became president who wrote them, right? John Jay,
Madison.
he does. Now, isn't it interesting that Jay, who gets put on the Supreme Court, uses the Federalist Papers for presidents while he's on the Supreme Court?
Mm. Hmm. He started that. It's interesting.
And
I didn't
tell
know that.
me that,
Hmm.
yep, well, I'm sure he was the one that used him.
Hmm.
And then Madison becomes president, and Alexander Hamilton, just becomes the Treasury guy or whatever,
Hmm.
or something like that, right? But
Yeah,
I mean,
Secretary of
only one of them
Treasury for
become,
Washington. Hmm.
yeah. So I'm just letting you know that we have a perception of things, and people tell us this is why this is, and a lot of times people don't question it, and that's part of how history comes to be believed, even though it's not actually based on fact.
Right.
I mean, and I'm talking about that in lots and lots and lots of things. You know what I mean? It's not just now. It's not just it's we've talked about that before on one of the shows. The one I like to bring up is like Ramses, right? They found out that this one thing that he wrote was all propaganda.
Ramses. I
This
don't know
battle
that.
that he
Yeah.
won, he actually lost.
Huh.
So go ahead.
Oh, you're talking about Ramses, the Egyptian pharaoh.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
the,
Yeah, it's all about propaganda.
he
I mean,
it is. It is. So
that's the
that's
whole
the
world
thing
is
is that
about propaganda.
it is, and history has its own too. And with time, I think it's kind of like a cold case.
Hmm.
You get to look at it, more things get opened up, things that were hidden maybe come to light, things that were
Hmm.
secreted away. Do you know what I mean? So, like papers or
Hmm.
drawings or personal things that, sometimes come to light and say what was going on. Anyway, so just stuff like that. But
Hmm.
I
So
do
that's what
think
we're
that
going to
it's
be talking
very
about: the
interesting.
history of
Yes.
Article 5, the Constitution. We're going to be talking about the current day issues that could be solved with amendments. And it sucks that our other podcast got deleted, but we went through all of them. I mean, we'll talk about them in depth. I mean, what what are a few of them?
It's to stop the prohibition of medical marijuana in all
Mm-hmm.
50 states.
Or of
It
recreational,
is
just
to
end the prohibition on
Well, right,
cannabis,
but
right?
we can start with
Well, but
medical
if you're gonna do an
because
amendment,
they
it
have
should nip it in the bud. You don't want an amendment that's like a half measure.
probably,
I
but
don't
we'll
think.
see. We'll see.
But that
Well,
one,
you got to get 34 states.
right? End the
Go ahead.
prohibition on prostitution, and
Yes.
and what a
To have maybe a federal database, and everybody has to have a background check if they're going to get a gun.
oh yeah, an amendment uh, for common sense gun regulation. Yeah, that everyone can agree on. That you could get 3/4 of the country to agree on something like universal background checks. I think that's doable. Um, something like ending the legalized slavery. So I'm basically talking about amending the 13th Amendment to take out the portion that allows for slavery as a punishment for prisoners,
God, they
uh,
just hate it.
and get rid of private prisons in an amendment. I think that makes perfect sense for an amendment, and something that a group like Black Lives Matter should probably think about getting behind, and how they could use Article 5 for their, because if you're protesting, you might as well be protesting for something. And if you're protesting for an amendment, that's about the most powerful thing you can protest for. And you can show up at your state house, your state legislature to protest. And then you're really getting somewhere. So these are all
Or
things.
we always suggest that you speak to your state legislator long before it is in session.
Right. Yes, definitely.
You start a relationship with them if you
Mm-hmm.
can.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is such that I have tried. She is unwilling to have any sort of relationship with me,
Mm-hmm.
and that she won't do anything I ask her to do.
Mm-hmm.
And since she's a public, I believe that she doesn't really want to do her job.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no middle ground.
Well, so hopefully on this show we will have candidates for state races and any candidates that we think are that we want to talk to about Article 5, basically whether they're for it or against it. We want to ask them why, and and we're not going to be shy about promoting people who are courageous enough to use that power that is given to them by the Constitution. So yeah, hopefully we will get there someday. We'll have to address our tech issues. I'm gonna stop beating myself up about it. There's a little
You say that one more time, you know what's going to happen.
I
You
know,
know
yeah.
what happened.
Okay, I'm off it. I'm dropping it.
It'll,
Um, but anyways, I can't stop thinking about the other amendment that I would do, and that is for ranked choice voting. And let me just get back to that in a second, but I want to address the video that I watched this morning on Status Coup featuring Jimmy Dore, where they were talking about YouTube. They were both griping about YouTube not promoting their videos in the algorithms and not getting enough views on the videos that they're putting out. And I have 3 points about their video that I want to address. I like Status Coup. I follow Jordan Sheridan on Twitter and Status Coup on Twitter. I've completely unsubscribed from Jimmy Dore. I'm done with him. He's a con artist or a grifter. I mean, con artist is a bit strong. He's a grifter. He's he's out for the money. He's not in it for the cause, and that's painfully obvious because he doesn't talk about solutions. And when I've proposed solutions to Jordan on Twitter. Now, of course, he may not have seen my tweets, or my comments on his tweets, although he probably did. I've informed Jordan on Twitter that there is a union for YouTubers. So if you've got a problem with the YouTube algorithms, you should be joining FairTube. Fairtube.info for all the information on the YouTubers Union. And they are demanding transparency and fairness, hence the name FairTube. So really, if you're not following up all those criticisms of the YouTube algorithm and the YouTube demonetization problem with a plug for FairTube, then I don't want to hear it. You're just bitching because you think that's going to get you more clicks. You think crying about YouTube is going to get you more viewers that will somehow translate over to people watching your 2.5 hour long coverage of a protest.
well,
I mean, I'm
and
sorry,
the
but
thing
people
that,
probably just aren't watching those. Like I said, again,
well,
protesting I'm all in favor of, but it's not really accomplishing anything, and it's actually somewhat counterproductive because it's letting off people's steam. People's energy is finite, and if you're giving them an outlet like protesting, they're not channeling it into something more productive. That's my two
And the other
cents.
thing
Yeah.
that I was going to say about YouTube, this is what I want to say about YouTube. I have a feeling that they just demonetize as they choose. It doesn't
Yes.
matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're okay. I have lots of animal rescuers that get demonetized too. They're monetized and then boom, one day they're not monetized. Not
Mhm.
because they've done anything different. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So, and then
It's
they'll go back to
arbitrary.
being monetized.
Mhm. It's
It
just
is. It's like,
it's who's looking at
so,
it and
I
what kind
mean,
of mood they're in that day. It seems like I don't really know, and YouTube's very secretive about it, and that's why FairTube is demanding transparency.
right. So
S-
we should talk to all the animal rescuers about getting on there too, because
Totally.
it's the same thing with them. They have the exact same problem that, like I said, and for them, I mean, I understand when you're doing this for a living, but when you're an animal rescuer, everything has to be given to you. There's no way
Mhm.
for you to earn money except maybe like YouTube. Do you know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like just, and even that is very small
Mhm.
when it all comes to it. I've had animal rescuers show me how much that they make on YouTube. I mean,
Mhm.
they're willing to just show it to you because they want people to know I'm not making a ton of money. I don't know how
Mhm.
they afford to do what they do with the animals. I'll be honest.
Mhm.
So I'm just saying about YouTube, to whine about it does, like you said, does you no good, and it is
Mhm.
very arbitrary. And I think it's just like, I think when they're starting to pay out too much money to a certain category, maybe they just
Mhm.
sort of start flipping off the switches.
Mhm.
Like, okay, you don't get paid, you don't
Well,
get
they're a
paid, you don't get
business.
paid.
They're
Do you
in
know
the
what I mean?
business of
Like,
making
yeah,
money. They're not in the business of
right,
promoting small streamers, I mean,
right,
if they were living up to their original business model, they would be promoting the small streamers
right,
and letting the
right,
algorithm actually lead people to things that they're going to like, not try and force
right.
them down a different path that's going to be more profitable because they're taking money from the mainstream sources. But
And that's what I'm sort of saying. Yeah.
mhm.
I
And
mean, it's just that they
so
go
the
ahead.
YouTube union is one big issue, the YouTubers union. But the other thing they were talking
Yeah.
about is we should be nationalizing these tech companies like
Tech.
Facebook and YouTube, which is ridiculous. If you're going to nationalize Facebook so that everyone has to use Facebook to engage in American discourse, like no, the clear
Yeah,
real
and then who's watching the watchers?
exactly. Yeah, so then it's all no, we don't want the federal government to run Facebook or YouTube just because they've gotten so big. The problem is that they've gotten so big. They should have been broken up a long time ago. We need trust busting monopoly busters who will break up these monopolies. Facebook shouldn't be able to own Instagram and WhatsApp. They should be broken up. YouTube bought all these other competitors and then just shut them down. So they should be broken up.
And unfortunately, that's an old business model from the car manufacturing of like the 50s. So
Hmm.
that's no new art of war strategy capitalism game plan. Do you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? That one's been played before. And
Hmm.
not just the new, like not just the urban legends about, oh, there were these prototypes. No, I'm talking about at one time there used to be a lot of car companies, and then other car companies bought them up, merged them, and then there got less and less and less until there was
And
three.
that's something you can pressure both political parties to do. Both parties should be jumping at
Yeah,
breaking up the big tech because that's a big feather in your cap if you say I broke up Facebook and I broke up YouTube from Google. Maybe Google shouldn't own YouTube. YouTube shouldn't. I don't think YouTube should be owned by the federal government, but maybe Google shouldn't be able to have the maps, the search engine, the video platform, and like everything online. They should be broken up that way. I'm not saying that is how it should be done, but something like that. And if and Republicans don't like big tech at all, they're up in arms against it. Democrats barely talk about it, but they should be talking about it. And yeah, it shouldn't be nationalized. It shouldn't be our goal as leftists to just nationalize things. I mean, we should nationalize the things that make sense to nationalize, like the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry, pagan communists. You said the airline industry. I think those make perfect sense to nationalize. But,
yes,
anyways,
because
yeah,
you're. But go ahead.
yeah, it
And
was.
what else that
Go
I
ahead.
was. Go
You go
ahead.
ahead. Okay, I'll keep ranting on their video. It was their. It just ticked me off this morning. Yeah, no, federalizing those things is dumb. And their other big. They didn't really talk about it in this video, but those are two big third party guys. Jordan and Jimmy Dore are always, especially Jimmy Dore, is always talking about we need a third party. Yeah, a third party would be great. I'm all for third parties. How are we going to make that happen? Third parties have no infrastructure. They've gotten no inroads in smaller states. They haven't like taken over one state legislature or something, or even made significant inroads into any one state or any city or anything like that. So how could we do it? Well, we could have an amendment for ranked choice voting. Amend the Constitution to put ranked choice voting as the 28th Amendment, and there you go. You could have independents, multiple parties, not just three, but all kinds of parties, and and they would all actually have a shot in every election just overnight if we got that amendment. But how are you going to get that amendment? I don't think Democrats and Republicans are going to pass an amendment for ranked choice voting because that really hurts the parties, which is our goal to take the parties down a peg. So how are we going to do it? Article 5.
The
It's the
only way
only
that you can
way
do is,
is Article
well,
5.
it is, and also though is that then you start on the smaller scale
And that's how it
of
should be done.
dealing with
Yes.
state legislators who you can get behind and support to say, look, this system doesn't work for you as a politician. It doesn't work for me as a voter.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what we should do about it. And you might, and that's where the Article 5 comes in, yes.
Mm-hmm. So those are my 3 points. I mean, I'm this close to unfollowing Status Quo. I mean, as they're ready to point out, their videos get used by other outlets anyways. So it's like, why? I don't know. Do I
Well,
want to just hear
I think,
cranks?
okay,
I mean, we're
okay.
kind of cranks, but
I, something, I don't really totally understand. Well, I do in a way, but I guess this
mm-hmm,
was going to happen with this fracturing of the left.
mm-hmm,
Because everybody thinks that as the right fractures, if the right is fracturing, which I don't really believe, in some ways it is.
mm-hmm,
Um, it is not so much on policy, economic policy, as social policies. That's what
the
that's what
right.
the Republican Party is kind of torn up about. That's what they're
Mm-hmm,
torn up about. Now, in a sense, the Democrats are torn up about the same thing, but not in exactly the same way, which is yes, the Democrats have all these social, quote, justices or social, causes, or
mm-hmm,
they're supposed to be better on them, but they're not really when it all comes down to it.
uh-huh,
And because economically they're not any better.
right.
So if economically you don't change, society will not change. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a class analysis. And I think Jordan Sheridan obviously has a class analysis. I think he's not a grifter. He's actually authentic. So I hope he will look into FairTube if this video ever makes it to him. I hope he'll drop Jimmy Dore. I hate to say it, Jimmy Dore is toxic. He's
Well, I
he's
mean,
not
he's
a
that
serious person.
fracturing on the
He's
left of where
disingenuous.
he wants to go, where that he doesn't actually. Okay, the thing with
Yeah,
this
the
is what
fracturing of
we
the
say
left.
about
That's
Jimmy
sorry.
Dore.
Yeah.
That's all right. This is what we say about Jimmy Dore on this show, or what I say about it is that he doesn't. He's like so many that just do the talk and won't do the walk. He doesn't do any research. He doesn't look into it. He just gets this, like like a wild hair up his ass, and
Mm-hmm.
then everything supports it. You know, that's so like typically his story.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of what we found out. That's what does about his story is that mystery comes in. People have realized that it wasn't just one story in the past. Like women did have a story. Like
Right.
there was always another side. Maybe they lost, but the
Mm-hmm.
losers had a side, a story, whether the victors wrote it or not.
Right.
And that's what we're finding out. So you have to not just think that what you believe today that may even have factual basis can't even be changed tomorrow. That's part of really being progressive, really having an open mind, really looking for solutions.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do any of those things.
No. His solutions are him ranting and griping about things that people can agree with, so therefore the clicks and hence the money are flowing to him. And I don't think there is a fracture on the left so much. I think there's a perceived fracture on the left because guys like him are bringing in right wingers. But what I think is happening is it's actually the left is just growing, and it's just right wingers are coming through a pipeline of people like Jimmy Dore, and they're realizing, oh, I'm not really Republican. I'm actually like some kind of libertarian slash progressive. But then slowly they'll realize, oh, those libertarian things I believe are all of the social issues. I'm socially libertarian, which is actually the same thing as being a progressive, and I'm economically progressive. And then eventually they'll just realize, oh, I'm just a progressive, and they won't need Jimmy Dore anymore as this sort of stepping stone to the right. And I mean, that's giving him the best case solution that he's having that effect, although completely
Well,
unintended by
and if
him, but whatever.
and if he's doing it as the grifter, what he's hoping to do is get the right. I mean, there's a segment of right wing who will watch, what they consider to be liberals beat on other liberals. That's an easy thing to do.
Hmm.
That's an easy thing for either side to do. Do you know what I mean? Not just that, and
Yes.
that's what I'm saying that he does. He doesn't, just like when he wanted to do the do
Force the
the
vote.
force the vote
Hmm.
on AOC. It's like you got your own representative.
Yeah. After he was
Why are
talking
you not
shit
talking?
about the Justice Democrats, saying they were, that they're nothing, and then pushing them to do something that would be a stupid strategy, and then saying, "Oh, you're weak because you're not doing this stupid strategy that I'm demanding." Whatever.
Yep.
No, and I mean
And I can
our.
understand that people wanted them to do this, but
Mhm.
the sausage is not. The sausage ain't pretty being it's being made. Trust me, there is nothing. There is nothing appetizing about it at all, and that
Mhm.
is sort of that thing. That right there is it
That's the
being
crux.
made. Like, and they came out, and their defense was, it's not going to help us even if we got the Medicare for all to pass because we have this cap
Uh-huh.
that won't let us use it, that
The
won't give us
PAYGO.
any money to do it.
So they argued to get rid of
Pago.
PAYGO, and they got it. So, and they got no credit for that from those types of
That's
people.
right.
But so our
Well, and
where
hardly any at all on any media
yeah,
whatsoever.
of course,
Do you
yeah.
know what I mean? Because
Hmm.
that wasn't glamorous. It wasn't glitzy. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't bling. It wasn't.
Right,
It wasn't whatever. That's a frickin' sausage. So Americans, I'll say it again. We make lousy informed voters.
right.
We are just the terrible, worst, most horrible informed voters.
Yeah.
There, come for me.
You get no
I'm
argument
I'm
from me. I
old.
I mean, no, you're absolutely right. And we have like the lowest voter turnout of like any Western developed country or democracy. We have such lower abysmal voter
Yeah, you want
turnout.
people to vote? You want people to vote? This is what we got to do. After every election, every state ought to have a lottery where the person that votes, that everybody who voted got the chance to win like $100,000. How many people do you think would start fucking voting then?
Yeah, that's what they're doing with the vaccine. It seems to be working, I guess. That's it's